Hello Internet, I'm Jackie Fox and I'd like to start this video with a desperate prayer for America.
What do you need?
I'm good. I can't.
In retrospect, one of the defining aspects of the Trump presidency may end up being the 45th president's love of coups. At the time of writing this script, it's 2021 and Biden will be the 46th president by the end of the month. But Trump is still trying some deeply corrupt tricks to overthrow his record-breaking Democratic loss a few months back. So far, 2021 hasn't been kind to the former president. On January 3rd, audio of Trump begging a Georgia official to swing the state for him was released to the public, raising legal concerns of a quid pro quo, much like the events that led up to his impeachment. Trump starts the call with Brad Raffensperger, Georgia's Secretary of State, by saying that he must have won the state based on some interesting evidence.
So we've spent a lot of time on this, and if we could just go over some of the numbers, I think it's pretty clear that we won. We won very substantially, Georgia. You even see it by rally size, frankly.
Then he moves on to his big ask.
The number is large. We'll have it for you, but it's much more than the number of 11,779. That's the current margin is only 11,779. Brad, I think you agree with that, right? That's something I think everyone, at least that's a number that everyone agrees on. But that's the difference in the votes. But we've had hundreds of thousands of ballots that we're able to actually get you a pretty accurate number. You don't need much of a number because the number that, in theory, I lost by the margin would be 11,779.
He supports his demands with conspiracy theories and faked video evidence that Raffensperger and his lawyers calmly debunk.
I've listened to what the president has just said. President Trump, we've had several lawsuits and we've had to respond in court to the lawsuits and the contentions. We don't agree that you have one. I didn't agree about the 200,000 number that you mentioned. And I go through that point by point.
As he puts it later in the call,
well, Mr. President, the challenge that you have is the data you have is wrong.
Frustrated, Trump resorts to threats of legal action if he doesn't flip the state for him.
It's more illegal for you than it is for them because you know what they did and you're not reporting it. That's a criminal offense. And you can't let that happen. That's a big risk to you and to Ryan, your lawyer. That's a big risk.
This is followed by a clear restatement of his demands.
So, look, all I want to do is this. I just want to find 11,780 votes, which is one more than we have.
Then, on January 6th, amid challenges to a congressional procedure that would rubber stamp the election, an angry mob leaves a Trump rally where he filled their heads with an hour of conspiracy theories like the ones mentioned in the phone call. He starts things off by saying things like, "We will never give up, we will never concede," and demanding that they show strength and demand that Congress do the right thing. But near the end of his speech, he set the mood for the upcoming riot, saying, "We will fight like hell, and if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country." Moments later, the crowd converged upon and breached the Capitol building, breaking windows, fighting the police with fists and flagpoles. Tear gas was deployed by both sides, and the mob was ultimately dispersed. By the end of the day, over 50 were arrested, 2 pipe bombs were disarmed, and 4 people were left dead. In terms of directly advocating for violence on January 6th, the president's lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, takes the cake, demanding of the DC audience So, let's have trial by combat to overturn the election. It's easy to see these words as a spark to a powder keg, but I intend to ask where that powder keg came from as well. With my eyes glued to live video all day long, I saw any number of stunning events that you would almost have to see to believe. And while we're right to be shocked by this turn of events, everyone saw it coming. And yet, the DC police were slow to react, barely holding the invaders in the Capitol crypt. It seems they only break out the numbers and brutality against crowds that aren't largely white and male like this one. To demonstrate this, here's a video of the police reaction to a protest at New York Trump Tower on the same day.
And look at this bullshit! Look at this bullshit! Look at this bullshit! Look at it! Look at it!
Just a few months ago in Lafayette Square, you might recall that the president attacked unarmed peaceful protesters in a public street, just so he could get a cynical photo op in front of a church and hold a Bible upside down.
It seems the DC police couldn't take the threats of insurrection seriously, and no wonder, as they are largely made up of verifiably false conspiracy theories. The funny thing about this whole coup is that it managed to cow several key Republicans and keep them from voting, as they had planned, in favor of an effort to overturn the election and disenfranchise millions of American voters. In the debate before the vote on the Arizona objections, many of those same Republicans gave hastily written speeches to chastise the protesters and rioters in an attempt to save face and let the nation know that they changed their minds. And yet, 6 still voted for the measure to overturn the election results in that first vote. It continues to astound many liberals and leftists that Trump's base is so willing to accept the narrative that his loss was somehow illegally manufactured. This is not at all surprising when you consider that vast swaths of his presidency were spent reinforcing this idea to his base. While it's an old trope by now, in the context of the Trump administration, the narrative that socialists can only win elections through corrupt means resurfaced in 2018 with Venezuela. When Hugo Chávez's successor, Nicolas Maduro of the United Socialist Party of Venezuela, won the election with over 2/3 of the total vote, representing 46% of registered voters. Trump's administration was among the first international voices to call the victory illegitimate, and put a lot of institutional power behind the effort to overturn the results and seat Juan Guaido. This pressure caused a number of other countries to hop on board with the claims of election malpractice. Even as recently as last month, the Trump administration placed sanctions on a Venezuelan firm associated with the parliamentary elections after Maduro's Socialist Party won over 2/3 of the vote again, even under the control of the conservatives backing Guaido.
Y le digamos a Donald Trump con Venezuela, no te metas. Hand off Venezuela. Donald Trump, hands off Venezuela. De inmediati. Triunfo. Nuestra venganza será el campeonato para Venezuela.
Well, it's time for Media Watch now. Emma James is with us in the studio. Good to see you, Emma. Now we're going to start with the chaotic situation in Bolivia. The president, Evo Morales, of course, resigned yesterday, and there is a huge power vacuum in place now. Just talk us through some of the reactions online.
Yes, it's interesting to see that there is a real coordinated effort to create fake news and also to tip the balance, really, in terms of what people are saying online. Lots of people noticing tweets like this one. Hi, I'm Bolivian. I'm also a political science student, and this is a flat-out lie. That in reaction to another tweet about Bolivia. But as this Twitter user points out, growing numbers of these likely fake pro-coup accounts are appearing in my mentions. This one can't even get its lies straight. Bolivian in the tweet and then American in the bio. This one made me laugh too. I'm really enjoying the insightful analysis about the situation in Bolivia from Hector and a string of numbers, whose account was created 5 minutes ago.
In 2019, U.S. intelligence agencies went through similar motions to discredit the election of Evo Morales in Bolivia. His margin in the first round of voting was enough to win the election outright without needing a runoff. which isn't common in their electoral system. Some found this overwhelming victory by the Movement for Socialism suspicious. And again, the Trump administration threw its political weight behind having this election disqualified.
But where did it all go wrong? Because it's important to remember that he did oversee a period of great economic growth. He cut poverty levels almost in half, from 60 to 36%. So that's millions of people no longer living in poverty thanks to the changes that he made in the country.
Morales, confident in his support, was a good sport about the whole thing and agreed to a second vote. This was initially rejected by his opponents, and the election wouldn't finish playing out until 2020, when a conservative interim government ran an election that barred Morales from running and elected Luis Arce with over 55% of the vote in the first round. This was an even greater margin of victory than the previous election. Interestingly, Luis was the Movement for Socialism's replacement after Morales was banned. So the election really demonstrated that the Bolivian hunger for a socialist president is real. A report by the Organization of American States claimed to have evidence of clear manipulation. This was later proven not only to be false, but apparently a product of a computational error on the part of the OAS. In December of 2020, Venezuela held a parliamentary election in which 91% of the seats available in the National Assembly were won by Maduro's United Socialist Party in a landslide election, demonstrating again that the original vote was likely a valid representation of the will of the people. Despite this, interim President Guaido is still in power, even though no one in Venezuela voted to give this power to him. This election was a rebuke of the 2018 coup that placed Guaido in power, as well as the many international forces, American included, that helped him gain the legitimacy to pull it off. Both of these politically convenient coups backed by the Trump White House share a few other commonalities. In each case, the most recent victory was won with over 50% of the total vote, one being as high as 67%. Here in America, that may not seem terribly uncommon, but both countries tend to have more than 2 presidential candidates per election, so winning a clear majority in the first round is often unheard of. And in both countries, a second election closely matched the results of the first, even after allowing conservatives to take control and supervise the electoral process. These are resounding victories that illustrate the viability and popular enthusiasm for socialism in Latin America. It might have been impactful to America as a whole, but the only serious coverage of the 2 elections was done in bad faith by the right wing, while liberal media remained largely silent. While most liberal American media tries to pretend that countries in Latin America aren't moving towards socialism by omitting news about them entirely, right-wing outlets ran story after story about socialist voter fraud in Venezuela and Bolivia, creating this unfounded socialist cheat to win narrative within the right. When you combine this narrative with the idea that Biden is somehow a socialist, you can see how the past few years have primed right-wing diehards to see any victory slightly left of center as being a fabrication, even without hard evidence, because this was the standard presented to them for years by outlets like Fox News and One American News. Of course, the president's own words helped as well. I'm not going to dig through his prolific tweets or the continuous stream of him running his mouth to whatever camera will record him, but it's safe to say that there have been a few recurring and dangerous themes in his public statements over the last few years that add to this. He's called for civil war if he was defeated, and said repeatedly that he could only lose the election if it was rigged against him. He capitalized on the shady actions of the DNC during the primary to plant the seeds of a narrative of election malfeasance. Now, I believe there's some truth to the idea that the DNC did everything in their power to screw Bernie out of the nomination, but it's not evidence that they later messed with the results of the presidential election. The primary is theirs to run as they please, so they have built in many ways to legally fix the results. But they hardly have the same relationship with presidential elections. Because of the years of rhetorical groundwork, those who believed in these stories at the time they were manufactured, Biden cheated and stopped the steal, are an easy sell because they believe that it has happened time and time again. Maybe the scariest part is that they might really fear for their country and that their vote is being forcefully taken away from them. I'd be mad too if I believed that, and I think you would be as well. This is Trump's latest and most powerful mind trap. Despite foreign countries attempting to hack our power grids and an ever-accelerating pandemic where a combination of cold weather, new viral mutations, and a lack of support and coordination in getting vaccines to the public is leading to the highest peaks of COVID-19 in the US, And Trump can't be bothered to do anything more than golf and spread his viral delusions. This presidential inattention has accelerated the daily death rate of COVID in America to at least 1 9/11 per day. Yet, he does nothing to save anyone but himself. Actually, while I was writing this, we topped 4,000 daily deaths, meaning that I now need a more deadly event than 9/11 to describe what's happening every day in America right now. Adding to the perplexity of the average liberal who didn't hear much about the socialist victories in Venezuela or Bolivia is their lack of a context for this movement, which leads them to believe that this is something coming out of nowhere instead of a narrative that right-wing audience had been spoon-fed for years now in relation to Latin American elections. This phenomenon highlights the dangers of our disjointed news media and how propaganda can be built over time to support such a narrative even without any evidence. As I said in my Meme Wars video, a thought virus is most persuasive to someone who shares its language and context, and the foreign coups against socialist victors built for them a context through which to understand Trump's fictional claims. From that perspective, people's willingness to believe a thought virus like Stop the Steal hinges on them having been given the context to understand that without needing to see any concrete evidence. Even beyond that, it should be clear to us that a man who overturns any international election that he doesn't like would be inclined to do the same when the electorate turned against him. First it was Venezuela, then Bolivia, and after no one fought him on either coup, those chickens came home to roost here in America too. And now, people are dead because of it. If you are still watching the video at this point, I'd like to take the time to ask you to check out the following channels, which, like my own, have not reached 1,000 subscribers yet. And if you're not subscribed to this channel, hit that button, ring that bell, do the YouTube stuff. And in an effort to keep this channel ad-free into the future, I would also ask that if you appreciate the content I'm putting out here, that you could go over to my Patreon, or even for a one-time donation, my Ko-fi page, and send me a little bit of money to help me make ends meet in a year that has been troubling the hell out of everyone.